Because we have a very special guest to open things up tonight. One of the legends of Silicon Valley, also my former boss, so very good taste. Vinod Khosla, who doesn't really need an introduction, but has been betting on ideas that most people thought were impossible for decades, and then just watches them come to fruition and become inevitable. From the internet, right, to clean tech, to AI, Vinod was a champion of AI long before it was fashionable, and was the first outside investor in OpenAI. I think we've all heard of that one. So let's give it up for Vinod and get into a great conversation.
Thanks. Let me start with a show of hands of how many people are entrepreneurs here or want to be entrepreneurs. Very good percentage.
Yep, so I think...
I know who to talk to now.
Yeah, we don't have any economists here, I don't think. So let's start with your advice. So this has been a crazy market. You've seen it not even from the beginning, from the pre-beginning, right? When things, we couldn't call it AI, we had to call it machine learning. What have been some of the most interesting ideas or companies that you've seen? What advice, first and foremost, would you give founders trying to build in this environment today?
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is most of the experts all of you run into are experts in a previous version of the world, not the one you're trying to create. So I tell people, don't pay too much attention to what the experts are telling you. They're usually not good. They're great for extrapolating the past, not for inventing the future you want to create. So as entrepreneurs, I really encourage you to think differently about whatever you're trying to do, and if you believe it, go chase it. I'll give you the most stunning example. How many of you think in 1996, TCP/IP wasn't going to be the future of the internet? Anybody? I will tell you, not a single telecom carrier, not even companies like Cisco, believed TCP/IP would be the protocol used for the internet. Everybody, no exceptions, thought it'd be ATM. How many of you have heard of ATM? Just a few hands.
Not the ATM banking machine.
Yeah. No, asynchronous transfer mode. Why? Because everybody at every major carrier said that's what they would use for the internet, not TCP/IP. By the way, the biggest return I've ever had in my life was betting it would be TCP/IP, and the only ones to bet on it. And so we got 2,500 times our money back in the 90s on a $3 million bet. That's pretty nice. You can do the math. And I tell you that story because if you do what experts all believe, you'll only do what everybody else is doing. You won't do something radically different. And so it's always good to pick up something new, something you believe in can be made true. Now, it's higher risk than the conventional path, but much higher payback and much more rewarding because you're creating something new. So that'd sort of be my opening words of advice. So I don't know where you want to take the conversation.
Yeah, so you have a great idea. You have a vision, right, of what tomorrow looks like that's different than everyone else. What are some of the characteristics you've then seen in both founders and founding teams? Obviously, the ability to hire. What separates the culture of early stage startups that end up succeeding versus those that don't? And has that changed at all in the past 40 years you've been doing this and now in this new AI era?
look, we should come back and talk about the AI era because it has made so much more possible than was possible. But I like to say there's a massive difference in a 10-person team between a team building a $0 million company and a $0 billion company. It's how you think about what business you're in is very different. How you think about the team you need to assemble is very different. When you're building, and your revenue may be zero, but I always say between 0 million and 0 billion, there's a massive difference that you can generally tell early in how people are thinking about what they want to create. Another common question for those of you who've talked to me, I always ask, not what you're going to do in 2026, that's important, but way more important is what do you want the company to be doing in 2030? And if you don't have a good answer, I'd encourage you to think about that. It's a pretty important piece of what kind of company you will end up building. The second thing I like to tell people is the plan you build is almost irrelevant to the company you will be. The team you build is the company you build, not the plan you make, because plans change easily, teams don't change easily. And it ties back to this idea of this massive difference between a $0 million company and a $0 billion company with exactly mathematically the same revenue, but very different self-images and self-trajectories they can go on.
So in this era, what do you think is important to think about as you build team? Obviously, some things have stayed the same over the last few decades, regardless of technology, but some things are different today.
Look, money is much easier to get if you're an AI company. By the way, lots of opportunity outside of AI too. So how many of founders here working on non-AI companies? Good to see some hands go up, so don't be discouraged. There are really good opportunities because not enough people are paying attention to outside of AI. Now, within AI, I like to say, people ask me, what are the interesting opportunities? And I like to answer by saying, what isn't an interesting opportunity? Which says, with AI, what's not up for reinvention?
So I'm going to push on that a little bit, though, because I agree, every single thing around us is going to change with AI, and most of us can imagine that. But not everything is that billion-dollar revenue company that you just mentioned. So how do you think about, of course, all the different opportunities we see around us, but like honing in on what's going to be big and disruptive?
So the first thing I'd say is big and disruptive shouldn't always be the founder's goal. There are many different goals a founder can have. I have a talk on our website called Entrepreneurial Roller Coaster that I first made in 1986, so a long, long time ago. And most of it has not changed. So it's still on our website. It wasn't in PowerPoint back then. It was on overhead projectors, which most of you probably haven't heard of. They were acetate on which you wrote down slides and then had a light projected onto the screen. How many have heard of overhead projectors?
How many were born in 1986?
Enough. That's good. That's how I first did this presentation. But the point is, it's perfectly okay to have a goal, say, I just want to be my boss. I don't care about building the biggest company. Building a big public company has a lot of nuisance associated with it. And so you may not want to do that. You may want to do it, perfectly okay. Make the most money, perfectly okay. Be most famous, perfectly okay. Just work with friends, perfectly okay. Work for yourself, all those are legitimate goals for entrepreneurs, So don't be pressured into something that isn't your personal goal since you're starting the company. And also be clear why you're starting the company so you don't get distracted from your goal. And I always tell people, if I was starting a company today, I'd want to have the most fun. That would be my only goal. What can I have the most fun at? So first, be clear about your goals. I would then say there's multiple ways to get to your goal. And in today's world, it's hard to think beyond 2030. It's hard not to think of at least 2030 in terms of a long-term vision for yourself. So it's a hard thing. Beyond 2030, it becomes so unpredictable. I say I can have a goal for 2035, but who knows where technology will be in 2027, so how am I going to predict 2035? Having said that, there's hardly an area that won't be radically impacted. My personal assumption is almost nobody in this audience will need to have a job by 2035. I think people will work on what they want to work on, not because it's what they need to pay their mortgage. Maybe 2040, the time frames are really hard to predict accurately. The opportunity before then and to 2030 is almost every profession is worth reinventing. An AI accountant, an AI chip designer, we've all heard of AI software engineers, and I'll come back to that. AI mental health therapists, AI doctors, AI oncologists. You think about a profession and almost certainly it can be built in an AI. Then you have two choices. By the way, that opens up about 100 great opportunities. That then says you can decide to do it in a big way, higher risk and more chance of winning, big, but higher risk. So let me go back to this software engineer idea. We made two bets in that area. One was Replit. Replit, Lovable, we've invested in Lovable too. That's the idea that people who aren't programmers can be programmers. Somebody who doesn't know what SQL is the right target for that. On the other end, instead of building a co-pilot like Microsoft did and Cursor did, and I wish we had invested in Cursor, but it was much more of a, let me assist the software programmer. And we decided to bet against that and for the idea that you just build a software programmer and not try and help a human with a co-pilot. I'm still convinced by 2030, all of it will be software engineers, not co-pilots for humans. Whether you're talking about a software engineer, a chip designer, or a doctor. So you have to decide which strategy. Both have been successful. And I'm pretty sure Cursor's in a pretty good position to get to being a standalone software engineer instead of the co-pilot mode they have today. So there are multiple ways to get there. You have to decide which path you want to take. I generally favor going after the bolder, bigger path to get there faster. But most people prefer incremental paths of being a co-pilot, assisting somebody. But I find humans get in the way of co-pilots. They're just really poor at it, and they don't want to change. So accountants don't want an accounting co-pilot. They just think their job is threatened, so you might as well just try and threaten their job directly. So I prefer that strategy. I know, I'm wondering, where do you want me to take?
No, so you and I have talked about this, and I completely agree. I did see some heads nodding, not in a positive way, when we were talking about this strategy. And I never like to get into like the politics of AI and so forth, but it's hard after you just said that by 2040, none of us will need to work. I think that's probably true for everyone who comes to the Chase Center tonight or otherwise. But what about the 6 billion people who don't necessarily share in the advantages today, or probably even in 5 to 7 years? How should we, and I know it's not the main focus of founders who are trying to disrupt the world, but is that something we all need to take some responsibility for?
We clearly do. The bad news, and I did a pretty long piece. How many have seen a piece I wrote in September of 2024 called AI Dystopia or Utopia? A few hands. For those who want a detailed look, it's a 25-page piece on will AI lead to dystopia or utopia? Dystopia would be a few people with all the money and power and everybody else without a job. And all kinds of abuses like brainwashing people and bad AI. So I address both those. The bottom line is what happens will depend on which country and what its politics are. Pretty unlikely German corporations, for example, will let AI replace labor. My funniest story, today in 2025, German robots working in retail are not allowed to work on Sundays. Did you know that? Fact. Because retail workers don't work on Sundays. So it sounds funny, but politics will make a big difference. And what policies a country adapts will change the trajectory of how AI gets adapted. So, very soon, 2030, AI will be capable of doing most jobs better than humans do. 2035 for certain. Whether AI is used to do those jobs or not is a question of how it gets adapted, what policies are. The American Medical Association in the US opposes AI getting reimbursed for a diagnosis which AI is provably better at than the human doctor. And they may win that battle and delay it by 5 years or 10 years. That could happen. In fact, they're totally opposed to AI getting compensated for the same work, or even compensated 1/10 the level that they can do it at, even though they keep complaining there's a shortage of doctors, right? So politics will mostly be determining how fast this capability gets adopted, and just because the capability exists doesn't mean it'll get adapted.
Just to pause on that, bringing it real for founders building today, how should founders, especially at the earliest stages, think then about politics, government, regulatory issues, not just in health and medicine, but like across the board?
Well, the right strategy for a founder is to get their technology in through the slippery slope. Get it in a way, that's where I actually think co-pilots might help. It's like, all these companies saying they're going to adapt AI widely to all investors and saying they won't lay off people to the politicians. They're speaking out of both sides of their mouth. And if they're growing rapidly, they could keep up that for a while where they hire no more people and have AI do more of the jobs, but they don't fire the people they have for political reasons. So, look, capitalism is by permission of democracy, and democratic voting can elect the right or wrong officials, and I think that's why I say it'll depend by country. The benefit of AI is massive by any standard. But the distribution of the benefits will have to be driven by good policy. On its own, it will result in great asymmetry. And I wrote a piece in 2016, I think it was in Fortune or Forbes, I forget which one, a long 5,000 word piece saying AI will result, this was 2016, in great productivity growth, great GDP growth, all the things economists love, except it will have increasing inequality. And unless policy and politicians fix that, it'll slow down the adoption of AI. When it comes to an individual entrepreneur, you want to make it look like you're causing the least disruption, or you will see resistance, political resistance to it. I think capitalism in the US will make it easier to adapt. More socialist countries will have a different approach. Europe is one I point to that way. Now, China likely will use what I call Tiananmen Square type tactics to force the greatest productivity in their economy and win the race. That is where the danger in AI lies. But picking your strategy, pick the one that's going to be most politically acceptable or least visible.
And so,
and by the way, we've talked mostly about software, AI as software. The whole field of robotics and physical intelligence is going to be just as large. To give you a sense, very large part of the US economy. And I don't know the distribution between physical labor, but human labor is about 15 trillion in the US. If you look at the AI opportunity, at least a third of it is a reasonable guess to be replaced in the next 10 years with AI. 5 trillion of AI will create well over 100 trillion of market cap for somebody. So that's the opportunity for all of you. But I'm staying too high level. Let's get to more grounded conversation.
well, I wanted to go back to the question of hiring teams, right? So in this era, 5 years ago, you absolutely needed a team with some maybe AI researchers, a bunch of ML engineers. We were trying to fine-tune models, sometimes build our own models and train our own models. And in some areas, that's still relevant. But in the majority of areas that you're talking about, is that still needed? How should founders think about building their team, complementing themselves? How technical should the team be? Should they go for sector expertise as well early? Just how do you think about that in this era?
Yeah. I do think there's huge percentage to be gained in teams. And people always underestimate what can be done with teams. I think option pools should be very large, not the small numbers that YC encourages. It's my biggest critique of YC is they don't encourage the building of awesome teams. When Sam was running YC, I'd always have this argument with him. You should encourage people to build teams. You should help people build teams. There's a massive difference in the long term between having a software engineer, and I may offend some people, do AI, and an AI researcher do AI. As long as you can find an AI researcher who's not too academic, but can figure out how to use a model well. That means better understanding how these models work, not just how to use them. For example, that's a common mistake I see in AI startups. If you're a non-AI startup, not understanding, so we invested in Commonwealth Fusion as a fusion startup. The same year we invested in OpenAI, which was 2018. I had a very hard time convincing the founder of Commonwealth Fusion, that AI would play a significant role in controlling plasma. They are now collaborating with DeepMind, and this is good, but it always helps to think about where AI can help early in constituting a team, and that's where you can start today, have the same revenue in 2026 as a startup A versus startup B, but be on different trajectories for 2030 based on the team you built. So I'm a huge fan of really strong teams. The gene pool of a company seldom changes later, because the first 10 people you hire the next 50 people, and they hire them in their own image, not imagining a different type of expertise that might be needed in the company. So it's very hard to say, hey, in 2 years we'll hire the AI person when we can really use AI. I can't say enough about building teams.
So how would you encourage founders themselves to think about growing into those executive roles? Sometimes founders that take things from 0 to 1 are not necessarily folks with the same skills as companies, running public companies. Is that something you look for, though, the potential to become the CEO of a large public company when somebody is starting? How would you...
So the best founder, the best public company will be a founder-led company. No question about it, if the founder can grow with the company. In fact, I'll tell you something stunning. I've been doing venture capital for over 40 years. I can't think in the last 40 years of very many examples that were driven by a large company, a large innovation driven by a large company, or an executive from a large company. Almost always, founder-led companies drive all large societal change, which also means building the largest companies. So could you imagine somebody from Lockheed or Boeing doing what SpaceX or Rocket Lab has done? Or somebody from, and people always say you need expertise in that area, only if you want to build an incremental company. The best founders are the ones that think from first principles and take a lot of input, but make their own decisions. So I always say, Patrick Collison, he'll take everybody's opinion, but then makes his decision. But he's never resistant. The bad founders are the ones who think they already know and don't take a lot of opinion. So it's this fine balance between taking a lot of input but making your own decisions and following your own vision and belief system versus doing what, quote unquote, experts tell you. So no matter where you look, can you imagine somebody from Hyatt or Hilton building Airbnb, or somebody from Hertz or Avis building Uber, or somebody from General Motors building Tesla, or I can go on and on. I can't think of one example in our world that came from somebody who knew an area, the exception being founder-led companies. Google wouldn't do Waymo, which is their biggest opportunity today, if they weren't founder-led. It's still the vision of the founders. So founder-led companies, any business school professor or any MBA would have said Amazon should never do AWS. It made no sense for a retailer to do it. But being founder-led, he had both the belief and the courage, and sort of asked, why not? Who can do it better than we can do it? And it's a pretty good case study of what founder-led companies can do. So I always say that's the way to think about it. Having said that, there are many times founders can't grow. Like Larry Page had no interest in being CEO of Google. And so, credit to him, he let somebody else do it. And he could, they still have enough control. They could run the company today. between Larry and Sergey, but they chose not to. And sometimes it's not what you enjoy. Sometimes you realize that's not what you're good at. I hate business meetings, so if I have to take somebody to dinner, it's the worst nightmare for me.
He has a dinner after this.
Only with my own partners, not with. I do very few business dinners, just because I don't enjoy it. And so, don't do what others expect you to do. Do what you enjoy doing and comes naturally, or you realize you're good at. And sometimes it does make sense to get a new CEO, or it's limiting a company in some way. But even there, it's very tricky. Lots of people can say lots of things about Travis running Uber and doing it poorly or others. Well, fundamentally, he had a view that Uber's business would be obsoleted by self-driving cars. He believed it. Not many other people on the Uber board or others believe that. I still believe it's true. They will either get that technology or be obsoleted by it. And so taking that long view is pretty important, as long as you can fund it along the way, which is always tricky. So there's no one recipe for every company. Depends on your circumstances, what investors think is hot, where you can raise more money, or what investors think is not interesting. Then you have to build it more slowly or with less capital. But anyway.
I'm going to put you on the spot as we wrap up here. You said that if you were going to start a company today, you would do whatever makes you have the most fun. In this world today, what's the company that you would start if you were, maybe a couple years ago?
I would absolutely build a new healthcare company, eliminate the need for doctors completely, worldwide, globally. All 7 billion people should have a personal primary care physician, personal oncologist, personal cardiologist, and all that should cost no more than $2 or $3 a month. That is entirely possible today. And I've been advocating for that in a country like India, where you can add all of medical services and all of personal tutors for education to the Aadhaar system in India. It's such a complete no-brainer. I'm giving a talk on this day after that the Indian embassy or the Indian consulate here put together. It's such a no-brainer. All 7 billion people should have a whole set of services. Almost all of education, easy to do K through 12 today. My wife runs a nonprofit, and they serve about 2 million students a month with free AI tutors. Personalized education better than if you could afford a human tutor. The same things are possible in medicine, the same things possible in law, so most people have access to legal services so they can exercise their rights. And frankly, most entertainment should be free. Now, all these things by 2035 should really, truly be free unless incumbents slow it down one way or another. I could go on and on, all the services that could be free. And then there's physical goods. I was telling my partners, the single most important thing I'm interested in is cut the cost of housing in half in the next 10 years. I haven't figured out how to do it, but I have plenty of good ideas on how to approach it, because physical goods is the one thing that isn't going to decline just with AI. The raw inputs, like where do we get more copper or more lithium or more steel, that's going to decline pretty rapidly.
So I think everyone should have plenty of ideas. If you have any one of those ideas, you can come pitch to Vinod directly. And I think that's a great place to end on such an inspirational note.
By the way, feel free to email me. My email is vk@khoslaventures. I do go through all my emails, sometimes long delayed, but I always go through everything. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. Let's give it up for